Aloha everyone, it's Ajanette and I am here to do your Module 4 personality lecture. For this module, we're going to focus on traits and stability of personality. And so it's one of the many perspectives that we'll be examining. As always, our learning objectives are to build a foundation of knowledge regarding the theories so that you can compare and contrast those theories, see the pros and cons of each and how they might be relevant to different areas and interpretation of psychology of personality. Our reading materials are going to draw from the Allen textbook, so that is on your syllabus and on your homepage, and I have provided a link here as well, and it is going to include chapters 1 and 2. They're both relatively short though, so we should still be okay. So as I mentioned, there's various perspectives. As you know, you've been introduced to kind of the broad differences in the perspectives, and then we'll dive in now as we progress through the content. We're going to actually analyze the different theories in each of these perspectives. Today's focus is going to be on the trait perspective. So we're going to examine some theories that are based on this notion that personality is constructed of traits and can be measured and studied and examined and organized upon these common characteristics. So trait psychology actually looks at these inherent dimensions of people's personality. So we actually examine specific traits or characteristics that tend to be consistent with that individual over time. So my mom might use the same descriptors as my teachers, as my siblings, as my aunties, as anybody else, right? Regardless of your place in the ohana in general sees you as having these common traits, right? And these reflect how I think, how I feel, how I behave, kind of how I engage the world. And traits are usually adjectives, right? They can be positive or negative. Here's a list of some words that are often used to describe people. Now, not every one of these words describes me, right? My personality would be based on the words that are regularly used to describe me. So I would say that I'm often described as, oh no, that one's not caring. I'm very caring. I'm very compassionate. Some people describe me as courageous. That doesn't mean that I don't have fear. A lot of people describe me as strong. I don't want to be strong anymore. You know, I'm 52. I really just want to be taken care of. I just want to be a big fat baby at this stage of my life. But overall, certainly students would describe me as flexible, genuine, and very liberal and progressive, right? These are all words that would be used by multiple people. They're consistent characteristics that are observed in me. Now, some negative traits, stubborn's not on here, but I would say that multiple people would describe me as stubborn, both personally and professionally. I would say that I'm definitely clumsy. Sadly, I passed that on to 2 of my 4 children. I can be impulsive at times. I'm definitely indecisive. I just left a luncheon and I ordered 4 different things because I couldn't make up my mind. I shared with everybody else, brought home some leftovers, but that's definitely a trait that is commonly used to describe me. So I would like you to think about words that are commonly used to describe you. And I would like you to think about both positive and negative traits that would be used to describe you, and consider integrating that into your learning activity. We're going to talk about the big 5, but think about traits that maybe aren't part of that big 5. And maybe these 2 slides can be some inspiration for you. Now, when we talk about you know, how do they define a trait, right? Like, how do they determine what is a trait? And it has to be consistent, stable, and reflect individual differences in personalities. So when we talk about a trait, we are typically describing, let's say, my stubbornness is present across situations, right? I'm stubborn in my relationships. I'm stubborn as a mom. I'm stubborn as a student. I'm just kind of a stubborn person. Now that stubbornness can be perceived negatively, but for me, I always say it also is what underlies my drive, my ambition, my achievement. Then also we have to talk about stability, right? Are things like stable? It's not just a time in my life, like I was a stubborn teen, but I grew out of it. No, it's really now I'm 52 and I'm still very much a stubborn teen, right? Or certainly as stubborn as I was when I was a teen. I certainly don't have that teen body, that teen energy, that teen stamina, any of that. And then also traits are what allow us to distinguish between different people, right? They're individual differences. And so the traits that would be used to describe you, either your thoughts, emotions, or behaviors, might be very different than the traits that would be used to describe me. So this notion of a trait allows us to differentiate between different people and different personalities, right? Maybe you're not stubborn. Maybe you tend to be very agreeable, easygoing, kind, flexible. You go with the flow. Yeah, that's not me. I would never use those words to describe me. Flexible, yes, particularly with students. But I'm not typically, I don't let things go easy. I ruminate over them, and it takes me a little bit to process and to make space for that emotion, and I have to let that emotion be fully experienced before I can let go, right? Like, I will forgive you in time, but right now I'm mad at you. You need to let me hold on to that for a little bit, and then, I'll persist past it. But for now, let my stubbornness ride its course. So you'll hear in your book, you'll see references to personologists, and that comes from this notion of personology. Anytime you see ology, you're really hearing, that really means the study of, right? Psychology is the scientific study of the psyche, the brain, and human behavior. Personology is the study of personality, right? And it's not just any study, it's a systematic study. It's a scientific study. But this really was not just theoretical in nature, or it wasn't just based on my own knowledge, right? It was actually a term coined to indicate that we were now going to systematically analyze personality. We wanted to be able to study it in a methodical way. And that was born from Henry Murray. And Henry Murray actually suggested personality is a combination. It's an interaction of your own psychological traits and circumstances and factors, but also the environment, the situational, right? So it's not one or the other, it's both. And they interact to create a very unique, dynamic you. Murray was one of the, if you remember back, we talked about the thematic apperception test. So it was a more modern version of the Rorschach test. It's an example of a projective test where people are looking at scenes, whether they're sketched or images, and they describe and explain what's happening. Very commonly used in a psychodynamic perspective, but he kind of takes on a more kind of social cognitive perspective as well. And he also wrote a book called Explorations in Personality. And it kind of moved us away from a psychoanalytic perspective and opened up a different understanding. This was also the time of kind of behaviorism, social learning theory. And so I'm sure some of that influenced his theory as it relates specifically to personality. Another real prominent individual related to trait theories and trait perspectives is Gordon Allport. And so he is a personologist who studies personality systematically, but he also wants to look at traits specifically. And why are traits important? Because they can help us distinguish between different people. They help us to categorize, identify, and maybe even describe and explain differences between people. So traits are the ways in which we differ. They might also represent things that we might have in common, right? You might be as equally stubborn as I, but they allow us to kind of identify how might two individuals be similar or different in those characteristics. They also have like varying degrees, right? Like I'm stubborn, oh my goodness, but my sister is super stubborn, super. Like she got mad at me in Hawaii one time and she did not talk to me on the whole plane ride home. Like that's how we were going from Kauai to Hawaii. And the moment we stepped foot on the airport to get on the plane to fly all the way back to Hawaii, and then there was not one. She was huffing and puffing the whole way. Her degree of stubbornness is like here, whereas mine is here. So Gordon Allport believed that there was this continuum, and we had varying degrees of a particular trait. He also suggested that unlike those lists, right, or the infinite number of adjectives available to describe human beings and their personalities, he suggested there's a set number of traits, right? There's these traits that represent a collection or a group of adjectives that can be used to describe any given personality. Now, this notion of traits does lead to the potential for an infinite number of characteristics that can be used. And so Allport and Odberg worked together to say, how can we systematically reduce that number of traits? So those two lists that we took before, are there things that may be similar to one another, right? So if I'm talking about, decisive, could that be related to something else, like definitive, right? If I'm talking about adaptable, could that be related to cooperative? Could that be related to flexible, right? Different ways of saying the same thing. Well, Allport and his colleague wanted to see if, in fact, they could systematically reduce the number of traits from this infinite bundle of words to, a narrower and narrower bundle of words. And they decided to follow this lexical hypothesis. They believed that all traits, if you look at lexical, it's referencing our language, our words, right? And so they suggested all traits can be found within the human language, right? Or, English language. Now, within any language, so Spanish, whatever it might be, our lexicon, the language that we use, reflects all possible personality traits that could exist. And they actually went to a dictionary. They identified all of the words in the dictionary that could be used to describe characteristics and personalities of individuals. And they threw that into a statistical analysis, which we talked about in the previous module, factor analysis. And factor analysis is statistically filtering, categorizing, finding those words that have similar meaning, finding how they correlate with one another. And those that correlate and stick together form a group. And instead of that group being 10 different traits or characteristics, that group actually represents a single characteristic that can be described with 10 different adjectives, right? That's factor analysis. And then consequently, what happened is they narrowed down all of the traits found in the dictionary, and they came down to 5, the 5-factor model of personality, also known as the Big Five. So sometimes you hear it as the Big Five, the 5-factor model, same thing. We're talking about a process by which these researchers broke personality into 5 primary characteristics. This actually is the most widely used personality theory even to this day. We use it for research regularly to examine how personality might influence student success outcomes, your success in a career, workforce, sometimes even relationships, right? And we actually have plenty of research to say what types of traits and characteristics people like in their partners, in their friends. So the 5 traits that it narrowed down to are actually best remembered in this ocean icon, right? This anagram. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Each of the first letters spells the word ocean. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These first 4 are positive traits. This last one, neuroticism, is a negative trait. When we're talking about openness, we're talking about somebody that's open-minded, open to different perspectives, open to new experiences, open to trying a new restaurant, open to challenging their own presumptions and biases, open to learning something new, open to considering an alternative idea that they maybe never thought of themselves before. Openness tends to be a characteristic that's highly valued among other people. People who have a higher degree of openness actually are rated higher in terms of being appealing to friends and partners. Conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is about my responsibility. Do I turn stuff in on time? Can I be relied upon? Am I mindful about other people's being dependent upon me? Do you know that you can take me at my word? When I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I follow through. I'm timely. I'm organized. I'm detailed. I'm conscientious about my workspace. It cracks me up when I share office because my workspace definitely reflects a higher degree of organization and cleanliness often than my neighbors. You can't really see. Extroversion. Extroversion references basically our not just sociability, our energy levels. So are we more energized, inspired, excited, charismatic when we're in the presence of others? That's an extroverted, right? Where I tend to express my emotions more openly with others and in the presence of others. I have a greater sense of energy and inspiration and emotional expression and sociability. Or introversion on the other end of that, where I tend to be more energized or more creative, more productive when I'm by myself, right? Agreeableness. Agreeableness is looking at how easy are you to get along with, right? Are you stubborn? Are you willful? Are you difficult? Or are you pretty easy, right? Where you kind of go with the flow. Neuroticism really refers to emotional stability. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been around a very moody toddler, and one minute they're laughing and cracking up, and the next minute they're crying, and the next minute they're screaming and throwing a tantrum, and then the next minute they're asking to hug you and kiss you, and right? That's kind of neurotic, right? Or somebody that is, love you, hate you, constantly worrying and obsessing over, did I do this well enough? Do you still love me? Did I make you mad? Are we still friends? Like that can be very stressful and straining on a relationship. So typically openness is something that's really prized. Agreeableness is something that's really prized, and conscientiousness tends to be really prized in individuals. In other words, people that have higher degrees of openness, conscientiousness, and agreeableness tend to be well-liked among their peers. Now, this particular personality theory was developed using that factor analysis methodology that we discussed in our last module, right? When we're talking about the science of personality. This is one statistical methodology used to narrow data. And so when you take as much data as there is to describe personality, this theory suggests it can be narrowed down to 5 main chunks. Now, some of the criticisms of this theory is, 5 is probably too narrow. Some people suggest 6, which we'll look at an alternative theory with 6 in just a bit. Some people suggest 8. Some people, don't subscribe to a trait approach at all. Additionally, some argue that, situation matters. For instance, I'm a professor. You give me a mic and put me in front of a class of 50, I'm okay. 500, I'm okay. Put me in a workshop and let me host a conference for 5,000, I'm still okay. Hand me the mic. I can talk about work. I can talk about psychology. I'm good. But flip that script. Take that same mic and that same 500 people and make it about me personally, like a birthday party. That's not my thing. I'm very introverted personally. So I'm extroverted professionally and I'm introverted personally. Me being different in different situations is part of the criticisms of the Big Five. It doesn't account for that, right? It suggests that I should be extroverted. If I'm extroverted in one situation, I should be as equally extroverted in another. And that's not often the way the human condition and personality works. So here's another version that your book has provided of the Big Five traits and a really good definition or reference, right? But openness, appreciating new anything, right? Conscientiousness, being careful, reliable, dependable, a rule follower. Extroverted, not just talkative, sociable, and enjoying others, but being energized and empowered by others, right? Whereas an introvert, when they're around a lot of people, they feel drained at the end of the day, right? So it's not just about, being outgoing. It's also about that energy source. Agreeableness, just really how well are you getting along with others? And neuroticism, do we have a lot of fluctuating emotions with that negativity coming in and out and in and out, right? That can be really, that volatility can be really draining on relationships. Here's another chart by your book that actually helps you kind of understand if you scored low, because remember, each of these is conceived on a continuum. So you're going to score somewhere on that continuum toward the lower end of openness, where you're a little bit more closed-minded, rigid, kind of set to your own ideas and perspectives of the world. You have very defined, this is what I believe is right, and these are my morals. And you're not really open to maybe learning, expanding, or changing. Whereas someone else on the higher end is very much going to be much more open and willing to consider other perspectives, maybe even that are non-traditional, that are novel. Same thing with conscientiousness and then the others. So read through these. Think about, jot down, predict. Where do you think on a scale of 0 to 10, where would you rank on openness? Where would you rank on conscientiousness? So I'm asking you to make predictions. Pause the video, make predictions, drop that in your notes, and then pull that into your learning activity, because you're going to actually do an assessment of your Big Five personality. And so I want you to be able to think about, did your results come out as expected? What did you expect your scores to look like? How do they differ from what you expected? Why? What factors might be contributing to those differences? And what is it about your experience that may have contributed to you developing those characteristics and traits at the level that you have? So when we talk about traits can be a really valuable way to examine personality because they can help us predict outcomes in other areas. For instance, we know conscientiousness is absolutely correlated with student success. Higher conscientiousness is associated with more time spent studying. It's associated with turning in your work on time, missing fewer deadlines. It's also associated with being more focused, being more committed, right? Here's some other things that might also be related to conscientiousness, right? Are you disciplined? Are you dutiful? Are you efficient? Are you contemplative, thoughtful? And so these all could be things related to student success. So conscientiousness is in fact linked to better student success. It's actually linked to better workplace success as well. Having the same types of traits and qualities that predict strong academic outcomes, they also predict strong professional outcomes. Conscientiousness can also be linked to better health. Why? Like my sister. She always takes her medication on time. She follows the doctor's orders very clearly and succinctly. I'm like, I disagree with his diagnosis, right? And she's far more conscientious and she tends to be very dutiful. And I'm like, damn, like I just need it to come from a doctor's note and she follows it to the T. Me, not so much, right? Okay. Here are when we talk about what other things might be in an overall grouping related to that trait, like what facets might exist beyond the trait itself. So openness might also mean you're open to fantasies, right? Because you're, open to new ideas and new thoughts. Maybe you daydream a little bit. You tend to maybe be open to exploring your feelings and giving space for that emotional processing. You also might be willing to consider other diverse behaviors, right? Where someone might be labeled as weird. You might just say, it's different, right? And you don't impose a judgment on it. You might also be willing to consider other arguments and ideas. And you're also open to other values and belief systems. So people who have higher degrees of openness tend to not be as stubborn in their own views and ideologies. They tend to be open to exploring, examining, critiquing their own views, and potentially being open to change, right? Based upon that new knowledge. And then here's some other facets associated to conscientiousness. So when you take your Big Five, come back to these facets and say, okay, do they seem to align with my score for agreeableness? Am I compliant? Am I modest? Am I more altruistic and straightforward? So you can come back and look at these other facets and see if those align. Now, beyond the Big Five is Hans Eysenck, and he actually really felt like the strongest traits were the extroversion-introversion continuum. That you could actually look at introversion-extroversion continuum and neuroticism continuum. And those two things intersect to create very different types of personalities, with different traits that are most common and prevalent in those personality types. So this person has a high degree of emotional instability or neuroticism and a high degree of extroversion, okay? They are an extroverted neurotic. They might be touchy, restless, aggressive, excitable, changeable, impulsive, optimistic, active. Somebody that still has that high neuroticism, but a lower extroversion score, so they're more introverted. They might be quiet, unsociable, reserved, maybe even withdrawn, pessimistic, sober, rigid, anxious, and moody. And then if you flip that, someone higher on the emotional stability or neuroticism score and low on the extroversion is more passive, careful, thoughtful, peaceful, controlled, reliable, even-tempered, and calm, consistent with an introverted, stable personality. And an extroverted, stable personality is going to be more of your leader, carefree, lively, easygoing, responsive, talkative, outgoing, and sociable. So I think this is what we typically think of when we think of somebody that's extroverted, emotionally stable, and extroverted. And this is often what we think when they're introverted. But when they're not stable, emotionally stable, it could look like these up here. And so Eysenck proposed this alternative to the Big Five and suggested that distinct traits emerge with the combination of neuroticism and extroversion, as we just noted. Oh, one more thing. He also believed that biology was likely the driving force between these differences. So personality is influenced by biology. This is the Hexaco model by Ashton and Lee. And the Hexaco model, like a hexagon, like 6, right, has 6 traits. So unlike Big Five, these are all similar as Big Five. But emotionality is just another way of saying neuroticism. Honesty, humility is the 6th dimension here. So this is the 6-factor model of personality, Hexaco, and it's suggesting honesty and humility is also a critical trait that is reflected in someone's sincerity, fairness, moral character, right? And this was the 6th dimension of personality. Here are some other traits that aren't captured in either theory. Machiavellianism, which I was just talking to a friend about today. Machiavellian, she suggested one of her colleagues was Machiavellian. And this is all based on the philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli and talking about manipulative people, right? People who manipulate others, they tend to be duplicitous. So, they're one thing to you and then another thing behind your back. They very much want power, control. So they're going to put on a mask to work the situation in the room the way they want it. So that's not captured in either of those personality trait theories, right? Need for achievement, those people that, like to be, they're driven, they're successful, they want to aspire towards success in everything they do, and, they're always striving. That's not captured. Need for just intellectual stimulation and cognition. I need my mind to be challenged. That's not reflected. Authoritarianism. Are you controlling? Are you demanding? Are you rigid in such a way as you have this very strict rule? I'm the boss, do it because I say so, right? Or I'm the parent, do it because I say so. Narcissism is somebody that actually tends to think of themselves in very grandiose, flattering ways. They tend to be a little full of themselves, have a really hard time being empathetic towards others, considering other people's perspectives, even looking within themselves and acknowledging flaws and seeing opportunity for growth. That's not captured in either of those trait personality theories. Narcissism is something that's commonly talked about. I mean, go on TikTok for 30 minutes and see, does it come up on your reel? And why? For me, I was in a relationship with a narcissist for 16 years. And so it very much comes up in my TikTok feed, right? Self-esteem's not captured either. How well do you value yourself? How do you talk to yourself? How do you view yourself? How do you view your worth and ability? Optimism. I am definitely not somebody with rainbows shooting out of my ass. That's not me, right? I believe there is such thing as toxic positivity. I got into a fight with a friend just recently over this. He's very optimistic. I'm good, hun. I woke up today and so life is good. Bullshit. I wake up and I'm diagnosed with cancer. I wake up and my dad's dead. I wake up and, some other trauma happens. Waking up in and of itself is not sufficient to constitute joy, right? So I do not have that kind of optimistic personality. In fact, I would say the glass is half empty more so than the glass is half full. And then finally, alexithymia, which is really, go back to the lexic part, right? The lexicon. We don't name our emotions. So when we don't know what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, we can't name it. We can't do anything about it. We can't address it. We can't understand it. That's why we try to tell our preschoolers, use your words. How are you feeling? We want to get them to name their emotions. So when we name them, we can begin to understand them and we can very much gain that sense of self-awareness, and that leads to self-control. So another important theorist in the trait perspective is Walter Miskell, and he actually helped us to kind of evaluate that situation critique a little bit. He suggested that we have to look at situational factors, not just personal traits and characteristics, but those situations that might elicit different responses, different emotions, different behaviors or thoughts. And so you have to look at, when you're examining personality, not just the individual, but how they might react in different situations. Context matters for his theory. So he looked at not just cognitive, not just how I'm individually thinking and perceiving, but that social environment that is influencing how I'm cognitively interpreting a situation. And that then works to influence my personality. So let's move on and talk about stability. I think this is actually going on to chapter 2, personality stability. So moving from traits to stability, you want to stop and pause me right now. Might be a good time to take a break, okay? Or if you want to just press forward, then that's great. So I want you to think of this as the emotional roller coaster. Happy, sad, pissed off, angry, laid back, right? I am on this emotional roller coaster. My emotions aren't stable, right? And imagine this roller coaster is taking you through different seasons of your life, right? And wait, I was up here at this stage of my life and I was way down here at this stage of my life, right? That shows instability. So when we're talking about personality stability, we're talking about consistency over time, right? Now, we can look at this at the individual level, where we're looking at my personality is pretty consistent. You would use generally the same terms to describe me at 25 as you would now that I'm 52. Or we can look at it at the group level, comparing a whole group of 25-year-olds to a whole group of 50-year-olds. I guarantee you, we're very different, both as individuals and groups. So while I am a believer that your personality can be generally stable, I also subscribe to the notion that our personalities change and evolve over time as well. And we'll talk about that too. So there's different types of stability. There's heterotypic stability and homotypic stability. Hetero, we're talking about multiple things. And then homotypic, we're talking about same things, similarities, right? So differences and similarities. Heterotypic stability, meaning that what you find is across different periods of one's life, they tend to still have a consistency in terms of how they would be characterized or described, right? Now, certainly I might experience some sort of trauma that might explain why my personality changed from one situation to the next. For example, like my first husband was a domestic violence perpetrator. He smacked me around. So naturally, my personality kind of changed as a result of that. And I certainly wasn't the same in my second relationship that I was in that relationship, right? By the time I got to my second relationship, I was looking for a different type of man, and one that I felt like I could take him on, right? Like, oh, he's littler than me, he's smaller than me. I can pack a punch, so I can hold my own with this dude. He's not going to be able to intimidate me. I'm not going to live in a constant state of fear. Little did I know, psychological abuse can be far more traumatizing than physical, or at least it was for me. Homotypic stability is when we're looking at you have the same type of personality really across time. So the way that, let's say, confidence manifests in your 20s is the same as how it manifests in your 40s. Maybe for some. So in any event, traits can change over time. When we're talking about the big five, we typically find, in general, the research in the early part found that extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness tend to increase with age. So you're going to find that like 40 and 50-year-olds might tend to be more agreeable and conscientious than maybe teenagers and 20-year-olds, okay? But also keep in mind that other research shows that sometimes these level out, sometimes they really decline, right? And I'm not as nearly as conscientious in my 60s as I was in my 30s, right? So you can't just think of it as being stable and increasing with age. And so I'm going to peak in all of these areas in my 70s and 80s. No, they can have a different type of curve, an incline and then a decline, right? And then typically things that decrease with age is openness, right? I might become a little bit more set in my ways as I get older. I might become a little bit more fearful of trying new things, right? You probably hear this a lot. Well, in my generation, right? Well, your generation is not me, right? And then neuroticism, thankfully, declines too. Some neuroticism may be influenced by self-consciousness too. And so maybe that improves over time. There is this notion of maturity principle. So as I'm a developmental psychologist, so I do study how people change over time. And one of the most important developmental theorists was Erik Erikson. And he suggested we continue to develop over the entire lifespan, not just early childhood. And I think largely trait perspectives kind of look at you develop your personality and it's set. But really, to me, from an Erikson perspective, that personality is continuously evolving, it's organic, and it's changing as you mature. And that is consistent with the maturity principle, suggesting that personality does change over time because we become more mature. Our frontal lobes literally develop, and so we're not as impulsive. We can think things out more clearly. We can make a plan and follow the plan and implement the plan. And so consequently, we are able to have greater self-awareness, have greater impulse control, have more logical planning, executive functions. And that maturity allows us to adapt better and more positively to situations, even challenges and barriers that we face. And it contributes to our ultimate success in being able to fulfill our goals, personal and otherwise. Additionally, there's this cumulative continuity principle, which suggests that also suggests that stability improves with age. Why? Because as we progress through the life periods, through the developmental periods, just life becomes more stable, right? So it makes sense that in early adulthood, I haven't acquired the same amount of tools, experience, perspective, social networks as when I'm in middle age. And so in middle age, I've accumulated more knowledge and intellectual resources and capital to inform who I am. And that consequently contributes to a much more stable, solid personality. I would definitely say I'm evidence of that. And now that I'm in middle age, as I'm in my 50s, oh my gosh, I know who I am. Granted, I have more cellulite. My memory sucks now. I'm a little bit more clumsy. I can pull a muscle just rolling over in bed. So I don't have the greatest physical strength. But oh my gosh, I know my strength and my value and my character as a woman. I know who I am. I'm proud of the woman that I am. And so of course I'm more stable now. I've acquired knowledge and resources to inform the woman I choose to be, right? What we find, that doesn't happen just with women. Now, your book says it happens with just men or women. And I hate that binary lens, right? I want you to be mindful that this just happens with people as we age over time. Even individuals that have gender expansive identities find greater stability in their personalities over time. Then there's the corresponsive principle of personality. So looking at there's certain things about me that are going to predispose me towards certain environments. So I'm going to choose environments that correspond to my interests, to my personality. And that's going to serve as a reinforcing agent. For example, I just went to a baby shower. There were nothing but academics at this baby shower. It was for a fellow professor, and there was an English professor, an anthropology professor, a language professor, 2 language, ASL and Spanish, 2 history, and a psychology professor. So here we are, right? Celebrating my friend's newest child. And guess what? Everybody got her books. Every one of us got her books of some kind. Why? Because we're academics. Because we value knowledge. We're passing on the gift of learning to her baby. And so it naturally, she is in an environment with this group of academics that corresponds to her love for learning, her passion. And so it just makes sense. And what are we doing? We're now reinforcing those innate personality characteristics in her as well, right? There's also something called person environment. Sometimes you hear it referred to as influences, transactions. There's no doubt that the individual, right? It's not nurture. It is how much nature and how much nurture. How much comes from within me, how much comes from within the environment to shape my personality and who I am. And we don't want to just divide it, right? We want to say, you know what? There are different factors or influences. There's a passive person-environment interaction, okay? And by interaction, we mean the person and the environment interact in a way where the person passively inherits the genes, right? And they also passively inherit the environment. So I might have, I'm born into an obese family that also has a personality and lifestyle that supports that obesity, right? And I'm a passive recipient of both. So nothing inherently, nothing inherent about me except I may have inherited those genes, right? But I'm not eliciting that. I'm not doing anything to pull those genes or to pull that environment. It just happens, right? There's also the reactive person environment. So individuals react differently to the same environment. So if you think about my siblings, there were 4 of us. We were raised in the same household. We're born to the same parents. Raised by the same stepfather. I would argue my brother received a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of bit harsher treatment than the rest of us. My dad was a horrifically abusive father. And so my brother took beatings regularly, daily, for me, for himself, for my siblings. But the 3 of us girls were subjected to much the same type of treatment and environment, and yet we're so different. How I react to the environment is very different than how my sister does. Or even my sister and I both having breast cancer. We were both diagnosed at 49. And she's like, yeah, it happens, you know. I do my treatment. She even had to have chemo, and she had stage 3. Excuse me, I think I have to sneeze. Excuse me. I am not a dainty sneezer. Anyway, she had stage 3. She had to do chemo. She had to do her surgery. She had to do whole breast radiation. She had to have a hysterectomy. And then she took hormone treatments. And like, she's fine. She never did a support group. She's like, yeah, it happened. You know, I follow my doctor's orders, and that's that. Me, I have stage 1, catch it super easy because I'm freaking paranoid that I have cancer because she had cancer, right? So I'm constantly checking my breast. Sure enough, 2 years later at 49, I'm diagnosed with breast cancer. How do I react to that? I freaking unravel, and I have PTSD. And so after my treatment, you know, I had surgery. I just had surgery and radiation, right? Nothing like hers. Not that, you know, we have to compare. But here I am, like, paranoid. I have a headache. I assume I have brain cancer, right? My stomach hurts. Oh my gosh, I have stomach cancer. And so I fell into some major PTSD. We reacted very differently. I'm also a very emotional person. She's not. I'm also a mother. She's not, right? So different parts of our personality react to that same diagnosis very differently. An active person environment means that the person is actively seeking out certain things in an environment. Athletics, right? Somebody that has a thrill-seeking personality, they're going to actively engage in things like mountain climbing or skiing or, you know, skateboarding down a steep hill, that kind of stuff, right? You're not going to see me doing that shit, right? Although I did jump out of an airplane, but I did it in solidarity. A friend was turning 50. She's like, I want to jump out of an airplane. Will you go with me? Her sister's like, hell no, I'm not going with you. So I'm like, I'll go. And I jumped out of the plane with her. Scared shitless, but I did it. But I'm not inherently a thrill seeker. I'm not seeking out those environments. She was seeking out that thrilling experience. And she's in a family where they engage in those types of things, right? Then there's the evocative person-environment interaction, where something about me evokes a different response in an environment. And I think about ADHD children. Sadly, research shows that teachers aren't very patient with ADHD children. Parents aren't very patient with children that have ADHD. You know, that they actually can be firmer in their discipline. They tend to be, you know, stronger users of corporal punishment. And that's actually not what the research shows benefits children with ADHD. They actually benefit from more patience, from more love, from a more gentle approach, not authoritarian approach, but actually empowering them, teaching them, equipping them with tools and resources to manage their attention in a better way and to help them filter out all of those distractions that tend to pull their minds in other directions or that feed their energy. They need more recess, right? They don't need more strict discipline. They actually need more flexibility to choose environments that suit them a little bit better. And being crammed in a classroom for 6-8 hours a day is not it. So that's evocative person. Now, you're not just influenced by one of these interactions or influences. All of them might pertain to you in different ways, and that all contributes to shaping your specific personality traits. Roberts et al. Came up with yet another analysis or way to conceptualize stability. So looking at this, he said it actually is AMSTA, I think is how it's in your book, but I put it as asthmat. And I did that, no, it's asthma is how it is in your book. I actually say asthmat. And the reason I say that is because all of these promote stability, and this last one promotes change. So attraction, right? Your personality attracts you to certain environments, activities, interests, hobbies, and those things then reinforce that personality. You also have people selecting you for your definitive personality, right? And they actually seek you out because your personality is attractive to them. So this is something from within you that attracts you to something, and this is something where people outside of you select you. Now they can become gatekeepers. For instance, narcissists tend to like people like me because I'm a bleeding heart. I'm just overflowing with compassion, forgiveness, empathy, things that they typically lack. But that means I'm kind of a carpet for them, right? So they seek me out. And because they kind of control and gatekeep, it limits my ability to grow and expand. And so it reinforces those traits that serve them well, right? There's also those that engage in manipulation, right? We can, in fact, manipulate an environment or a person to suit our personality. This isn't working for me. I'm going to change things up, right? And I'm going to make sure it does work for me. Attrition suggests that we actually drop, we pull away. So attrition is like the decline. We drop out, we pull away, we leave relationships, we leave people, activities that don't serve our personality. Like, you know, hey, I might join the gym, but I don't stay active because it doesn't support my personality. So I eventually drop off and I'm paying a membership for nothing for months at a time before I build up the courage to cancel it. Other people are absolute gym rats. They love it. Not me. Transformation is not something that actually supports stability in personality, but rather change, evolution of personality. And transformation can come from the environment, specifically operant conditioning within the environment. So consequences in the environment can either reinforce behavior traits or they might punish them and cause them to decline. So because of that, because of things in the environment and consequences that you experience, it can either strengthen certain traits or it can weaken other traits. And that's transforming and changing your personality over time. I'm also adding, oh, by the way, you can also undergo treatment or training. For instance, our personalities usually change as we advance in our education. We start to take on new perspectives, ideologies, approaches to how we engage the world and our relationships. And that's a good and wonderful thing. Sometimes being educated and going to school means some of your relationships fall off. You might hear people, even in your own family, say, oh, so you think you're smarter than me now, right? Because you're going to school, you think that you know everything. It's not that you know everything, but it is that you are learning. It is that you are growing. It is that you have more knowledge and information by which you can make informed decisions. That's not a bad thing. So don't take those comments to heart. Keep pressing on. Your education is valuable. No one can take it from you. And education is the means by which we change the world. So you press on and don't be discouraged. Finally, I added trauma. Trauma for T. Why? Because trauma can transform you. Sometimes it can transform you in negative ways. I do know that when I left my marriage where there was domestic violence, I definitely was traumatized. And I was hurt. I went through periods of depression and fear. But over the long term, I've experienced what's called post-traumatic growth. And it's transformed me in powerful ways. My brother's suicide at a very young age actually transformed me. It has inspired me in the work that I do now. It's inspired me to be a mental health advocate. It's inspired me to be an educator and to raise awareness about mental health. It's inspired me to reduce the stigma and stop shaming people and help people understand the underlying biological mechanisms, to help people see that it takes strength to get help so I can improve help-seeking behavior, and ideally so that I can reduce the risk of someone else wanting to take their own life, right? That's post-traumatic growth. That's being inspired and transforming based on those things that have happened. And for me, my personality has evolved significantly over my lifespan. So it has transformed and changed because of my experiences. And here's just another image of post-traumatic growth and a resource. There is an ECHO training organization that teaches these concepts and helps to empower people in their responses to trauma. But I do want to highlight these 5 domains over here. Personal strength, so people that have experienced post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Who have chosen to use that trauma as an inspiration toward growth. They typically demonstrate a higher degree of personal strength, right? That they are stronger now coming out of that experience. They typically find a support system and a greater degree of intimacy within those relationships. They may also filter out some relationships, right? But the relationships that they remain are stronger and closer and more intimate and valuable. They often appreciate life in new ways. They might value it. They might meditate and rest on it a little bit. They also are open to the idea of new possibilities, new opportunities. I'm going to go back to school after my divorce. I'm not going to let that impact me. I was homeless. I was now the mother of 2 children. I was unemployed. I was broke. I had to file bankruptcy. And I was open to the possibility of a new life through my education, and I pressed on. And certainly my education has helped me to break horrible cycles in my family and cause a whole new set of opportunities and possibilities for my children and the children that they have that come after them for generations to come. And spiritual development, not religious. We need to differentiate between religion and spirituality. Spirituality is a sense of connection to something greater than yourself, right? It's not just rules. It's not just following a regimented structure and set of beliefs. It's actually feeling greater meaning and purpose and connection. I have a sense of spirituality just in being around people from my cultural background in the halal, right? Just, oh my gosh, there's something very spiritual. Now, we as Hawaiians do believe that hula is sacred, right? But stepping into halal and my kumu hula and listening to her ole and to dance with my hula sisters, it's a beautiful thing. It's spiritual for me. It's not just an exercise class. I am connected at a very spiritual, deep, meaningful level with the people in my halau. Okay, and so on that note, we're going to wrap up. And as always, I want you to make sure you do your reading for the module. I want you to make sure you turn in your notes for both the reading and the lecture. And then this week, we have a fun learning activity. I hope it's enjoyable for you. I'm looking forward to your results, and I'm looking forward to meeting the superhero in all of you. Much love and aloha. Bye-bye.